Cave divers who never came back. They were the best. Careful, trained, focused. They knew the risks. They studied the maps. They checked every tank, every valve, every backup light. And still, they never surfaced. This isn't about thrill seekers pushing past their limits for glory. These are stories of experienced cave divers, people who respected the silence beneath the earth and still lost their way inside it. Because caves don't roar like the ocean. They don't shake like a storm. They wait. And sometimes all it takes is a fogged mask, a wrong turn, a missed regulator seal, and you're gone. In this series, we dive into 5 of the most haunting cave diving tragedies, some barely known outside the diving world. From the icy depths of Romania to the clear blue water of the Bahamas, each story is different, but they all end the same way, with divers who did everything right and caves that didn't let them come home. These aren't ghost stories. These are real names, real dives, real lessons. This is Cave Divers Who Never Came Back. Let's begin. The record dive that started like any other Dean's Blue Hole is stunning. A perfect blue circle in the Bahamas, silent and still. But beneath that calm surface is one of the deepest underwater sinkholes on Earth, 663 feet straight down. And in early 2025, 2 friends, Malachi Hughes and Zach Prince, stood at the edge, ready to break a personal record. Both were experienced. Malachi had logged more than 85 deep dives, reaching depths close to 400 feet. Zach had done dozens himself. They weren't thrill seekers. They were planners. Everything about this dive was carefully mapped out. Their goal? 420 feet, a new personal best. And to do it, they brought a system, a weighted cable with an engine block at the bottom. As they descended, a clip would slide with them to track their depth. If something went wrong, they had backup. Their vests would inflate, and special weights on their knees would fall off, pulling them back to the surface. They even ran 20 practice dives in the weeks before. This wasn't guesswork. This was as calculated as it could be. But then, the cable betrayed them. When they entered the water and reached for the line, they noticed something was off. The cable was slick, covered in oil. Where it should have offered grip and control, it slipped through their gloves like soap. Malachi started descending too fast. Zach tried to hold on, slow his drop, and signal. But they weren't in control anymore. The line was dragging them faster than planned, and deep down, speed kills. The descent spins out of control. At 300 feet, a third diver, Henry, was waiting. He was part of the plan, stationed as a safety diver in case something went wrong. When he looked up and saw the descent happening too fast, he knew they were in trouble. Malachi wasn't just descending, he was falling. Zach looked like he was trying to stay in control, but he was struggling too. Henry didn't wait. He dropped lower, fast. Another diver, Steve, also went in after them, even though he wasn't supposed to pass 300 feet. Zach was first to hit real trouble. Around 400 feet, he started experiencing tunnel vision, a classic sign of nitrogen narcosis. Your brain gets cloudy. You lose your sense of time. The world closes in, like looking through a straw. And still, Malachi was dropping deeper. Even through the confusion, Malachi helped Zach. Somehow, he managed to fill Zach's vest with air, giving him lift. That small act may have saved Zach's life. Zach started to rise, but Malachi didn't follow. He kept going, silent, fast, and alone. At that depth, the body starts to shut down. Narcosis, pressure, the cold. You can't think clearly. You don't know which way is up. And once you start dropping too fast, the window to react gets smaller with every breath. This wasn't a wild dive gone wrong. It was a calm, quiet plan that fell apart in seconds. The surface realizes the worst. Zach made it back to the surface, but he wasn't celebrating. He was shaking, silent. The look in his eyes said it all. Malachi was still down there. The support team moved fast. They contacted local authorities. Rescue divers were brought in. But this wasn't a reef. This was Dean's Blue Hole, and it doesn't give anything back easily. The dive to recover Malachi's body took hours. The conditions were tough. The deeper you go, the harder it gets to see, breathe, and think. But finally, they found him, deep below where the line ended. He didn't panic. He didn't struggle. His gear was still on. His body looked peaceful, like he'd simply drifted into sleep. Everyone who knew Malachi was crushed. He wasn't just another diver. He was known for being methodical, even cautious. He didn't cut corners. He took safety seriously. That's why this hit the dive community so hard. This wasn't someone ignoring warnings. This was someone who did almost everything right and still didn't make it back. That's what makes it terrifying. Because if it could happen to Malachi, it could happen to anyone. What the diving world took from it. After Malachi's death, the diving world paused. Forums lit up. Instructors rewrote lessons. Divers looked at their routines and asked, "What are we missing?" Turns out, everything matters. That slick oil on the cable, it had never been checked. The descent speed, no secondary line to break it. The rescue gap, just minutes too slow. It wasn't one big mistake. It was a chain of small ones. People started cleaning their cable systems. Divers began carrying redundant lift devices. There were more narcosis drills, more emphasis on team protocols. Malachi's name was mentioned in almost every deep dive debrief. Not to scare, but to remind. Even with all the training, the ocean has the final say. Dean's Blue Hole is still a popular dive site. People go there to chase depth, beauty, and thrill. But every serious diver who clips into a line at that edge remembers the story, not because of drama, but because sometimes you do everything right, and it still isn't enough. Malachi Hughes became a part of the water that day, a calm, strong presence, lost in the silence of one of the deepest holes on Earth. And every time a diver enters that blue, they carry his memory with them, one breath at a time, from the blue to the dark below. Malachi's story didn't end with gasps or a dramatic finale. It ended in silence, in a place that looked safe until it wasn't. But his death left something behind. A message that even calm waters can turn. Yet not every dive story is about sudden chaos. Some are about persistence, about explorers who go further, deeper, over and over again. Not for records, but for discovery. And that's where we go next. A cave that waited 34 years to be explored again. A mission built on planning, teamwork, and tragedy. And one man who didn't make it home. Cueva de la Peña Colorada, Chris Stool's final dive. A cave frozen in time tucked in the remote mountains of Oaxaca, Mexico, lies a cave that very few people have heard of, Cueva de la Peña Colorada. But for elite cave divers, it's sacred ground. The last time anyone dove deep inside was 1984, led by famous explorer Bill Stone. They reached a flooded tunnel called Sump 7 and then stopped. The gear just wasn't ready for what lay beyond. So the cave sat silent for 34 years, untouched, waiting. Then in 2018, a team of 24 of the world's most skilled cave divers returned. They weren't tourists. They were trained, equipped, and determined. Among them was Chris Stool, respected, focused, and one of the best. Their mission? Go past Sump 7, explore what Bill Stone couldn't, and maybe connect this cave to Sistema Huautla, the deepest known cave in the Western Hemisphere. But this wasn't a simple swim. Just reaching the dive point took days. The team had to hike through jungle, climb, crawl, and carry gear for miles. Inside the cave, they set up underground camps, hauled food, water, and heavy rebreathers through tight, flooded passages. Eventually, Chris and another diver, Connor, suited up for the first dive into Sump 7 in over 3 decades. The tunnel was pitch black, narrow, and freezing. Visibility was terrible, but still, they pushed forward, laying new guideline, carefully mapping the unknown. They didn't find the massive breakthrough they hoped for, but they found something just as important, proof that the tunnel continued. The cave wasn't done, and neither were they. Up next, the storm that changed everything. A storm changes everything. As the team planned their next dive past Sump 7, rain started falling in the mountains above. At first, it seemed normal, just a passing storm, but it didn't stop. It poured for hours, then all night, then into the next day. And in a cave like Peña Colorada, water has only one place to go, down. Inside the tunnels, passages began to flood. What was once a path became a trap. The team had to act fast. They pulled back to a safer area inside the cave, a large open space called the Whacking Great Chamber. It was dry, it was elevated, and it was their best chance. But it wasn't an exit. They were trapped, deep underground. No way back. Food was limited. Communications were difficult. They listened to the water rushing through tunnels below them, and they waited. Every drip, every echo, it all reminded them how quickly things had changed. Outside, their support crew scrambled to help. Divers searched for a way in. Equipment was repacked, but the water kept rising. For 69 hours, the team stayed in that dark chamber, cold, hungry, silent, hoping. Finally, on the third day, the water began to drop. A rescue diver reached them. Slowly, carefully, the team made their way back out. They didn't cheer, they didn't celebrate. They just walked into daylight, exhausted, grateful, and changed. But not defeated, because some of them, like Chris, were already thinking about going back in. The final dive days after escaping the flood, the team began planning another push into the cave. This time, they were going farther. Chris Stool volunteered to lead. He had the experience, the calm mindset, the respect for the cave. He wasn't chasing glory, he just wanted to see what was next. He double-checked his rebreather, reviewed the maps, prepped backup lights, tanks, and line reels. Every piece of gear was checked, again and again. On dive day, everything looked perfect. The water had settled. The path to Sump 7 was clear. Chris entered the water, and he didn't come back. No one saw it happen. There was no panic, no call for help. He just didn't return. A search began. Divers followed his guideline into the darkness. Hours passed. Then, they found him. Still underwater, still in gear, still calm, but gone. There were no signs of struggle. His equipment looked untouched. No sign of failure. It was like he had just stopped moving. The cave had taken him. The dive was called off. The expedition paused. What began as a mission of discovery had become a moment of loss. The team surfaced with heavy hearts. They had faced storms, cold, darkness. But this was the one thing they couldn't prepare for, what the cave left behind. After Chris's death, the team didn't go back in, not right away. The gear was packed up, camps were cleared. The jungle trail was walked in silence. But the mission wasn't a failure, not even close. The team had mapped new areas, extended the known boundaries of Cueva de la Peña Colorada, and most importantly, they'd survived an underground flood, kept each other alive, and honored their friend with quiet resilience. Chris's passing was a reminder that in caves, there's no such thing as a routine dive, that nature doesn't follow our plans, that even the strongest divers aren't promised a return, but also a reminder of why explorers dive in the first place, to see what's never been seen, to push past what's already known, to leave a map where there was only darkness. Chris left more than memories behind. He left a trail, a line, a path into the unknown. Today, Cueva de la Peña Colorada still breathes below the earth, quiet, dark, waiting. But now, when divers speak his name, they don't just talk about the dive he didn't finish. They talk about the thousands of decisions he made right, and about how sometimes courage looks like suiting up again after a flood, because the cave still has something to say. And that's what Chris did. A solo dive that went too far. Chris Stool's final dive reminded the world that even with a team, with planning, with the best gear money can buy, caves still hold the final word. But some divers don't go in with a team at all. Some go alone, chasing a depth no one's reached, in places where help is days away. And sometimes, those dives don't end with panic. They end with silence. That's what happened deep in the forests of Romania, where a peaceful-looking pool hid one of Europe's deadliest underwater mazes, and where one diver, Rafael Garski, never came back. A record-breaking dive that never came back. Izbucul Tauz Cave, Romania, 2002. Into the cold, alone tucked into Romania's Apuseni Mountains, is a quiet little spot called Izbucul Tauz. Most people wouldn't give it a second look. A still pool at the base of a limestone cliff, surrounded by trees. Calm, beautiful, harmless. But beneath it, a winding, cold-water cave system that drops steeply into darkness. On October 4, 2002, 30-year-old Polish diver Rafael Garski showed up with a plan to go deeper into that cave than anyone had before, past 260 feet, solo. He wasn't reckless. He was respected, calm, smart. His friends said he wasn't the kind to take chances just for thrill. He had done the math, rehearsed the dive, and checked every piece of gear. He brought 5 tanks, 2 with regular surface air, 2 with Trimix, a gas blend used for deep dives, and 1 filled with argon, not to breathe, but to keep his dry suit inflated and his body warm in the 4 degrees Celsius, 39 degrees Fahrenheit, water. Raphael's plan was to stash the surface air tanks midway, switch to Trimix for the deep stretch, then come back up slowly, switching tanks as needed. It was a well-practiced method. At 2:45 p.m., he gave the signal and slipped beneath the surface. The pool rippled, then stilled. His support team waited above. He never came back. At first, no one panicked. Deep dives can run long. Maybe he found a new tunnel. Maybe he was being cautious on the way up. But when 4:45 p.m. passed, then 5:30, the water was still quiet. No bubbles, no sign, just silence. The team waited, hoping. Then finally, they called for help. But Izbukul Tauz is remote. The nearest expert rescue team, the Polish Alpine Association, was days away. So the next morning, his friends dove in themselves. They hoped maybe he had gotten stuck near an air pocket. Maybe he was still alive. What they found would raise more questions than answers and begin a recovery that would take 5 days, searching the silence. The next day, as clouds hung low over the forest, one of Raphael's team members suited up. He followed the dive plan Raphael had shared. The first checkpoint was around 45 meters deep, where Raphael was supposed to leave his surface air tanks. But when the diver reached that spot, there were no tanks. That was the first sign something had gone wrong. Raphael hadn't followed his plan, and in cave diving, plans are everything. A second diver went deeper, down to nearly 80 meters. The cave was cold, silent, and tight. Visibility was limited. But at 78 meters, the diver's torch cut across something in the darkness. It was Raphael, face down on the rocky bottom. Not tangled, not broken, just still. His gear was intact. His mask was on. His tanks were all in place. But his body hadn't moved, and the silt around him was undisturbed, meaning he hadn't struggled. He hadn't thrashed or tried to escape. He had just stopped. The diver rose slowly. No one could bring the body out that day. It was too deep, too tight, too risky. The call went out again. Official recovery divers would arrive in 48 more hours. The team above ground waited in grim silence. There were no words, just grief. And one question hanging in the air: how did such a well-prepared diver die so quietly? What went wrong below? When Raphael's body was finally brought to the surface on October 9th, 5 days after he went missing, it was time to look at the gear. What they found painted a chilling picture. His argon tank, meant to keep his dry suit inflated and his body warm, was completely empty. A small leak had drained it without him noticing. Without argon, the suit compressed with depth, tightening around his limbs, locking up movement, letting in the cold. At those depths, the water is near freezing. Hypothermia doesn't scream, it whispers. It slows your hands. Foggy thoughts, drowsiness. His Trimix tanks were low, too low. His buoyancy system wasn't working properly. That meant he couldn't float upward, even if he wanted to. Add to that the fact that he kept all 5 tanks with him, instead of dropping the surface ones halfway, and you've got one heavy load dragging you deeper. Experts believe he became disoriented. The cold slowed his mind. His body tensed up. Narcosis kicked in, where the pressure makes you feel like you're dreaming. And in that dreamlike state, he just stopped moving. No panic, no scramble, just stillness. What Raphael left behind. Raphael Garski didn't die because he was careless. He died because in cave diving, even one missed detail can end everything. His story sent shockwaves through the diving world, not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. There was no moment of panic, no broken rule, just a slow, quiet chain of small failures. After his death, divers around Europe and beyond started rethinking how they planned deep dives, rechecking argon tanks, reworking suit inflation protocols, avoiding solo record attempts in caves that tight, that cold, that silent. What Raphael's story taught everyone was simple. You don't need to be reckless to die in a cave. You just need to be slightly off. His name is now passed around quietly in briefings, not as a warning, but as a reminder. Today, Izbekul Tauz is still there. The water is still clear. The cave is still silent. But now, it holds a story, a name, and a lesson every diver takes with them. That sometimes, the deepest danger is the one you never feel coming. Cathedral Cave, Rosa Diego. A dream dive between friends. Rosa Diego and Catalina Jose had grown up like sisters. They studied together, worked together, and found a shared love for the ocean. By 2025, they'd earned their cave diving certifications. Not experts, but passionate, cautious, and prepared. Their next dive was in Cozumel, at a place called Punta Sur. It was stunning. Crystal clear water, coral walls glowing in the sun. But deeper down, it opened into a place known as Cathedral Cave, a massive underwater chamber known for its beauty and its unpredictability. They came as a group of 4, Rosa with her husband, Carlos, a cave diving instructor with hundreds of log dives, Catalina with her fiancé, James, also experienced. The plan was simple. Rosa and Carlos would go first through Devil's Throat, a narrow angled tunnel that leads into the cathedral. Catalina and James would follow shortly after. The conditions looked perfect. The team was confident. Rosa smiled as she entered the water, ready to see something unforgettable. And she did, but it wouldn't be the memory anyone had planned for. When beauty turns on you, at first, the dive was peaceful. Devil's Throat was tight, but Carlos led with steady ease. Rosa followed just behind, her light beam slicing through the blue. As they entered the cathedral, the space opened wide, walls glowing from the sunlight that filtered in. But within moments, the current began to shift. It started as a light pull, then stronger. Carlos noticed it first. His fin tugged slightly off course. Rosa, smaller, felt it harder. They were being pulled, not down, but across. At the same time, Catalina and James were entering the cathedral too. The current hit them hard. James lost his mask. Catalina began to panic. Back near the rocks, Rosa was caught. Her tank had shifted. Her regulator slipped from her mouth. Carlos turned and saw her struggling. He swam fast, trying to reattach her air supply. He got it in once, but she was still stuck. The current dragged him away. He swam back, tried again. But every time he reached her, the force pulled him off. A decision no one wants to make. Carlos wouldn't leave her. That was never in question. He tried again and again. Each time, his air dropped lower. But Rosa was his wife. He wasn't going to leave her pinned, silent, still trying to breathe. Meanwhile, James and Catalina had surfaced. Catalina was shaken, barely coherent. James explained what had happened. The dive team called for help. Rescue divers suited up immediately. But Carlos didn't wait. He dove back in. He reached Rosa again. He pulled at the rocks, tried to reposition her tank, got the regulator in her mouth. But the current slammed him away again. His air was almost gone. James begged him to come back up. "You have to live," he said. "We'll come back. We'll get her out." Carlos surfaced. Not because he gave up, but because it was the only thing left to do. He had done everything he could. What the ocean leaves behind. When the rescue divers finally reached Rosa, it was too late. Her tank was empty. She was still pinned, her body gently drifting against the rocks. There had been no panic, no lost line, just one moment where everything shifted, and no way out. Carlos never dove again after that. He didn't blame the cave. He didn't blame the current. He just stopped talking about it. But the diving world remembered. After Rosa's death, safety briefings changed. Divers were warned more seriously about current changes inside Cathedral Cave. Instructors stressed equipment checks, exit strategies, more caution with dive pairs. But Rosa's story wasn't just about rules, it was about love, about trying everything, and still not making it. Today, when divers enter Punta Sur, they talk quietly about the woman who didn't come back. Not as a ghost story, as a reminder, even in the most beautiful cave, one moment can take everything. James Toland and Ted Hardy, Florida, 1979. Manatee Springs is a peaceful place. A freshwater spring in Florida where the water glows blue and the surface ripples gently in the sun. On that morning in 1979, it didn't look like the kind of place where two men would disappear forever. James Toland and Ted Hardy were experienced divers. This wasn't their first dive. In fact, it wasn't even a complicated one. They'd been in Manatee Springs before. They had their plan, their gear, and each other. They entered the water side by side, following a well-known route. Clear visibility, steady flow. Nothing felt out of the ordinary. But sometimes it's not about how the dive starts. It's about one moment, one mistake that turns everything upside down. For James and Ted, that moment came shortly after entering one of the narrower cave passages. James gave the signal. His air wasn't right. Ted moved in to help. That's where it all began to slip. When air can't be shared underwater, there's a simple rule. If your air runs out, your partner shares theirs. It's a basic safety drill every diver learns. But in James and Ted's case, their regulators, though similar, weren't fully compatible. They didn't connect properly. One tried, the other adjusted. Seconds ticked by. Water began to flood the shared regulator. Visibility dropped as silt kicked up from their movements. In a space barely wider than their bodies, they began to lose track of direction, of the line, of time. They didn't panic. They didn't fight. But they were now stuck in a dangerous loop, trying to fix a problem that wouldn't fix. They tangled with each other. They held on. They stayed close, but neither could breathe properly. And underwater, time is always running out. The tangle in the tunnel rescuers found them just beyond a restriction in the cave, side by side, limbs overlapping. Their gear was still mostly intact, masks on, regulators in place, but it was too late. There was no evidence of a struggle, no damage to the rock walls or signs of panic. They had simply stopped moving, quietly, together. One diver's glove was torn, maybe from trying to adjust gear or hold the line. Their reels had been extended, maybe to push deeper into the restriction, thinking they were going toward the exit. But they weren't. They had gone the wrong way. And in cave diving, one wrong direction, one loop of the line, can mean never coming back. What the line couldn't save, James and Ted died trying to help each other. They didn't break the rules. They didn't go deeper than they should. They didn't take wild risks. They did almost everything right. But the dive didn't care. The guideline that was supposed to lead them home became a confusion point. In stirred silt, a diver can loop back unknowingly and grab their own line in reverse, heading deeper instead of out. That might be what happened here. Their story changed how people talked about gear compatibility, about diving buddy checks, about the dangers of low visibility and line reliance. There's no plaque at Manatee Springs for James and Ted, but every diver who clips into the line there now does so with a little more caution, a little more respect. Because in caves, even friendship can't always save you from the silence. So we remember the names, we remember the dives, not to scare, not to warn, but to respect the quiet that took them. Because caves don't shout, they whisper. And if you listen closely, you'll hear the stories of those who never made it home.